I was regarded at Harvard Business School as being a communist.
A brief is setting out your ambition. The brief from the Pope was make them believe.
Innovation is ideas having sex.
It takes the same amount of energy to try and do something great as it does to justify something average.
If I was a CMO and I'd give them a 3-word brief, make us famous.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 24 of WFA's Better Marketing. Absolute delight today to meet somebody I've known for a long while. I've had the joy of working with, and it's Rob Cameron, who these days is head of public affairs at Nestlé. When I met him, he was CEO of Sustainability, a consultancy we used in my Barclays days. And before that, he was the CEO of Fair Trade for 5 years. And before that, had started his own business, which was a communications and reporting agency in the space that we now know and are very familiar with. But when you started it, Rob, it wouldn't have been familiar. So welcome. Great to have you here. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. And it's nice to be here. Nice to see you again as well after all these years. So, good to see you on fine form.
Can I start in a kind of peculiar place, which is, here you are now in a major multinational. I know you've dedicated your life really to trying to make the world a better place through sustainability, and actually must be really fascinating to be doing it inside a big corporate. How's it going? How are things?
Well, it's good. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I'm so pleased I took the opportunity. I have to say, it wasn't the first time they'd asked me about this role, but previously I'd always felt like it wasn't the right time or it wasn't for me. And then eventually I thought, well, at this late stage in my career, it's probably time to make the change. But actually, as it turned out, I made the change and came over here and started work on the 1st of February 2020. So new job, new company, new role for me, never done this kind of role before, with all that goes with an international move. And then within about 5 weeks, we went sort of into lockdown, or the first beginnings of a lockdown here in Switzerland. So, it was a kind of, it would always have been a strange start, but it was especially strange given the pandemic, and many others were joining the company at the same time as I did. But yeah, it's a bit of a strange one for me, because when you look at it, what most people do is join a corporate early in their career. And then they go through that kind of, well, I need to get out of here and do something different. So maybe go and do consulting, and then I want to give something back. So go to an NGO, or then maybe think, no, I should set my own business up. And I've done all of that, but I did it in reverse order. And I'm not quite sure how it ended up like that. But yeah, I joined an international company of epic size and scale right at the very back end of my career, having never worked in an organisation with more than 170 people up until now. So, yeah, it has been a bit of a transition, I have to say.
And have you had good coaching help along the way to help you ease into the new world?
I'd love to say yes, but actually I've got a great group of colleagues around me. And I think the other thing to say is that there is, quite honestly, only one company I could have done this with, and it's Nestlé. And the reason for that is because when I was running Flag, which was the design agency, which incidentally is still going today, we obviously left good roots. So when I was working at Flag, Nestlé was pretty much the last big client that I won before I moved over to Fair Trade. And then I worked with Nestlé when we were in when I was in Fair Trade, and we did Fair Trade Kit Kat and things like that. So I was in and out the building pretty much straight away as soon as I went to Fair Trade. And then Nestlé was one of my biggest clients when I was at Sustainability. So the last 3 big jobs that I've done, Nestlé has always been there, and I knew the senior management quite well. I was very aware of what Mark Schneider was trying to do here at the business. So in a sense, although it looks like a complete pivot, actually I was lucky enough. I mean, I couldn't have done it with anybody else, to be honest. It would have been really, really difficult for me to have joined a company of this size without having that kind of foundational knowledge from 15 years of working with the company.
So presumably, you were pretty quickly into a world of hybrid working. Good news is you were in Switzerland, no doubt, with a fabulous Wi-Fi connection at home.
Well, yeah, eventually it took a while, but yes, but no, it was very nice to be in Switzerland. The outdoor life, they kept a lot of things open for people to get out and about, despite the fact they locked offices and things down very, very early. But yeah, it was nice to be able to enjoy a bit of fresh air. That's for sure.
Yeah, and you and I, if we go back to 2012, we were talking about the agenda first set by Bob Diamond, very closely followed by and built on by Anthony, which was really to change banking to deliver against the sustainability agenda. And you were very good at helping us set targets, be accountable, deliver things. Presumably you arrived in a Nestlé that already had some pretty robust targets. Can you talk about where you are on net zero, what you're trying to do?
I think what first thing to say is that the history of this at Nestlé goes right back to the very beginning. And I know it's a bit of a schmaltzy old story, but in terms of social purpose, the company, not many people know this, but Henri Nestlé was a Swiss chemist. And actually his first product came about when he was called upon as a chemist. A neighbour's child was sick. And he figured out, well, look, if we perhaps pull this milk powder together and we can maybe figure out a way in which we can get some nutrition into this child. And it worked. And that was the beginning of infant formula. And although it's been at times a controversial product for the company, it is actually the original product that the company was founded upon. And that sense of social purpose that Henri Nestlé had kind of has endured the whole way through. Now, around about the early 2000s, 2005, 2006, Nestlé, together with Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, pulled together this idea of creating shared value. And this was in those days of CSR. But Nestlé, together with Kramer and Porter, were looking to try and find a way of, okay, so how do we really make this social purpose thing work in a way that doesn't say it's all about stakeholders, doesn't say it's all about shareholders. And the chairman, Paul Bulker, who was around at the time, was very, very committed to this. So creating shared value as a theme, as a concept, as a how Nestlé goes about its work has been there for many years. More latterly, when I joined the company, I was very, very fortunate when I came because the company had committed that it would be Paris-aligned net zero, but hadn't published its roadmap. So I was able to get my sleeves rolled up and get straight into that right off the bat. And we published the roadmap a year ahead of schedule. And it sets out, it's Science-Based Targets Initiative approved, sets out quite clearly how we plan to get to net zero. So that gets the climate bit done. One other reflection, you rightly say that a lot of the work that I've done over the years has been around sustainability strategy, and of course you need to have targets for that. Another piece of work that was going on when I came in was that we had a whole series of 2020 CSV targets. And I think, if I remember correctly, it was about 39 distinct 2020 targets that we were living with, and we were coming to the end of that phase. So we needed to replace them. It was the post-2020 targets project. And chief amongst the objectives in all of that was, how do we have fewer but more meaningful targets? So strip them right down. And it's been quite an evolutionary project, but we've done quite a lot of work to figure out, okay, so what are the things that matter most, and just zero in on those. So fewer but more meaningful.
And in terms of, I see you're wearing the badge there, aligning with Paris and the Sustainable Development Goals. How have you done that? How have you simplified against the development goals?
But we look at the SDGs through the lens of, okay, so which are the ones that matter most to us? How can we be in service of them? How are we already in service of them? And we identified, obviously, the poverty goal, I think, is really important. 2, on nutrition, food, of course, important. The health goal is really important. So, we look at the first 3 especially, but not exclusively so. I would be honest and say that we haven't said, right, in order to support the goals, we've got to have targets specifically in those areas. We've kind of looked at it a little bit more the other way around, business mapping back to the SDGs. One thing I do feel very strongly about, though, with SDGs, is goals 16 and 17. 17 being collaboration. And I really wish they would have put that first, because I don't think any of us, I mean, governments are really, the goals are really oriented towards member states, but governments are grappling with this. And so they really need NGOs, civil society, campaigning groups, and of course the private sector to come together on this. So I really regret that they didn't say, look, this starts with collaboration, let's put that top. 16 is important to us as well. And I think it's a much overlooked goal, peace, security, and strong institutions. And I think it's an area that really deserves further exploration. Of course, climate matters, nature and biodiversity matters, water matters. All of the goals really matter. But I do feel that the role of business in society, as we look ahead the next 20, 30 years, what is the role of business in preserving and enhancing secure, decent social systems, preserving and enhancing democratic institutions and people's rights? What is the role of business in areas of conflict, to try and either prevent conflict from occurring or restore decent institutions and stability? I think there's a lot of things that business can do in that space as well. So, yeah, it's a broad topic.
In LinkedIn, you've always had the rallying call of it's the private sector that can make a real difference here. And obviously, you're very active in the World Economic Forum. But, how do you think the private sector's doing? And what would you point out that could be done better?
Well, I think the private sector has to play a part in this. I've always believed this. I mean, this came through very much when I was running my own business. I think you can bring it right down to the impact that businesses have on people. And when you're running a small enterprise at the time, I think, when I was in the sandbox, so to speak, with Flag, and we had 15 or 20 people at the time, and all of a relatively young age. And then you see, hang on a minute, people are getting married, they're having children, their lives depend upon the success of this business, their careers depend upon the success of this business. And you get a sense of, and okay, that's in a small business, but I think you can extrapolate that all the way up. I think the world of work and the world, wherever you happen to be, but particularly in the private sector, I think has a huge impact on people's lives. So, I just think that we really can't overlook it in business, the impact that business has. So I think whether you're looking at it as the company's impact on people or people's impact on the company, it's an interplay that just is there. And I think when you ask the question, how is business doing? I don't think there's a sort of generic answer to that. I think it's good and bad in equal parts. I mean, we're in a real jam on climate. We're in a real jam on nature and biodiversity. We're in a real jam on water. I think we're in a real jam on equity, to be honest. But I don't think you can necessarily say all of that is because business hasn't ... I think business has actually been pointing the way in many instances for the solutions. So there's a kind of constant dynamic and a constant tension. And no matter how well business does, I think we've both experienced this, both in the banks that you've worked in and on us in our work together. No matter how well we do, there's always more to do, and there's always new challenges that are coming along that have to be addressed that you didn't know about before.
And what about the employee base of Nestlé? Because one of the notable benefits, this is an odd thing to say, of COVID is the activation of employees against this purposeful behaviour and doing things better. Have you got a very actively engaged employee base on this journey?
Well, yes, very much so. And in fact, if you go all the way back in my career, thinking about what we were doing in Flag in the early days, and it just became fairly obvious to me that if you could mobilise employees, you've got a kind of an active influencing force there. And I think what we've seen latterly, especially when you look at millennials and Gen Z, these age groups, they want to know that they're working for a company with purpose, and the data shows it again and again and again. You look at all of the Edelman report, for instance, their trust barometers. You look at all of the surveys that are assessing purpose, and that's what people want. They want to know that the company they're working for is taking its responsibilities, looking at how it can address some of these huge social challenges, and especially on climate. Now, when it comes to Nestlé, I don't know that Nestlé is necessarily massively different from other companies, but having listened to the CEO and the chairman talk about creating shared value for as long as people have, then I think it has actually, seeped into the consciousness. I can tell you that all of that stuff you see about how people want to work for a company with purpose, every time we do something on regeneration, we have this thing here about advancing regenerative food systems. We're very much leaning into the theme of regeneration now. And every time we do something on regeneration, boom, the uptick in people tuning in. It's visible, it's demonstrative. People want to be part of a regeneration journey now.
Can we talk a little bit about how you see the role of marketing? And let me make this specific to Nestlé on this journey, because as you'll remember, I had that rather amusing title of brand citizenship, reputation, and marketing. So I had the whole 9 yards, and actually having all the levers really did help pull it together. But marketing, I've also heard described as it's not really anything to do with them, and I totally disagree with that. But love to hear your view on what's happening in Nestlé, how you engage with marketing, what's happening there.
Well, funnily enough, pretty much the last call I had before this conversation was with colleagues along the corridor in marketing, and the topic of that particular discussion was the theme of regeneration, and pulling together some board presentations on how the regeneration story that we're creating, the narrative around regeneration, is being expressed in brands. So when you look at the if you think about it, an awful lot of what we do on climate, biodiversity, regeneration, and so on and so forth, a lot of that happens upstream. It happens in the supply chain. So how are you working with farmers? How are you securing livelihoods, and how are you making transitions in regenerative agriculture, and so on. So all that's happening upstream. But the question is then, well, how do you translate that into a consumer proposition downstream? And I think it's been harder for us to do that. I think we've got some successes along the way, and there's some good examples of this coming through, particularly in the plant-based space. But I think there's an awful lot more that we are able to do, and it's really starting to pick up now. But again, it goes back to the surveys. All the surveys say that consumers prefer products that have been produced sustainably or regeneratively or climate, taking account of climate and so on. That challenge of when a shopper is making her or his decision right at that point of purchase, I think we all know also that there's awful lot of other things that are weighing on people's minds: price, convenience, so on and so forth. So I think really bringing it to life through brands, I don't think it's easy, but I do think it's starting to happen, and I think you'll see a lot more of that. I mean, for instance, with Kit Kat. We're particularly excited about the potential of Kit Kat. We've already done quite a bit around our cocoa plan and bringing that through in certain parts of the world, and that will start to come together. Similarly on coffee, really good expression of this is Nespresso. I mean, I think Nespresso's got a fantastic reputation these days for the way in which it works with coffee farmers and marries that to the quality of the coffee. And I know some people have a problem about the pods, but actually when you look at the whole life cycle, if you can get the recycling piece of it absolutely nailed down, as we have in most territories, it's a great sustainability story.
Well, it's also a very well told story in store. Actually, when I was in Madrid in February, buying my Nespresso and my recyclable pods, I point out to you, it was very nice to see those farming stories being told. And actually, even the staff knew when I would say, "What would you recommend then?" So that they were selling gently the stories you're talking about. And I do think it's when you get that through the line, joined up narrative, that it becomes a brand building with proper purpose, you get some real success.
Well, I think that's right. And I also think that this is where technology is really starting to come through. So we have this various partnerships, one of which is with a firm called OpenSC. It's so simple now to see where stuff comes from when you've got that kind of technology. So I think we'll see a lot more of that, connecting consumers to the people that have produced the product. I think there's a real appetite for that.
Yeah, you must have dreamt of this when you were the CEO of Fairtrade. I mean, it's a remarkable progress, actually, when you think
Well,
about it.
it is, and it's going to be even more important, especially in cocoa, because I think, as most people know, cocoa it's a commodity with a lot of challenges. But one of the single biggest challenges in the first instance is traceability and transparency, because it's a commodity. So, as a commodity, yeah, it gets collected from farms. Cocoa beans are then, they go into a rather large system. So actually tracking it back to specifically which farm did that cocoa come from. And the technology is now there, and we're investing huge amounts of money into getting out traceability right the way down to farm level. And we've got some super exciting things going on in cocoa at farm level to improve cocoa livelihoods for farmers and address child labour. So, these are the things that I think chocolate lovers want to know about.
Back to marketing. So you're 3 years in now, and great to hear the collaboration and the join up. I mean, what are your ambitions for your agenda over the next 3 years? What kind of targets have you personally got that you're working against?
Yeah, for me, the most important thing is that we deliver. We've got 2025 targets that we have to deliver on. The next phase after that will be 2025 to 2030. I think there's a number of things that we absolutely need to do. Obviously, first things first. On climate, if we want to be net zero, we have to deliver on this 20% reduction and removals by 2025. That's, I think, really important, because without that, it makes the 2030 journey all the harder. The goal is that we're going to be 50% down by 2030 against the 2018 baseline. So let's not underestimate the importance of what we've already got in play. Similarly on packaging, I think that's another obviously key part of this. And just on the packaging piece for a moment, I think that one of the things that I'm really aiming for us, and there's a lot of work we've got to do here, is this issue of how do you get reuse and refill as a packaging solution? What's the marketeer job here? To make this not something that people feel worthy about, because actually that isn't going to cut it. It's got to be something that people feel really, really good about and is really, really easy. We're not going to recycle our way out of the packaging problems that we see around us. We do need new models, and I think a marketeer's role is making that really sexy and drawing people in so that it becomes part of just what people want. So that's a second big item for us. Look, I think the third area for me would be, we've done an awful lot of the work upstream. Now we need to see the flow through downstream. And I think, I remember those dinners you used to host at RBS, and I think about all those wonderful marketeers that you had around you there, and I think about our marketeers and the branding agencies we work with. I would love to see all of those coming up with really well thought through propositions that take all of the good work we're doing upstream and turn it into real sizzle for the consumers. I think that kind of pulling it through on the consumer side. We know that consumers want it. We've got to find ways to make it really sing for them in brands. We've got 30 billionaire brands that can do this. And I'm super excited about the next couple of years on the brand and marketing side.
That's fantastic. And I do think, the task is always for a marketeer to balance the short term against the long term needs. And this particular issue, at a time of recession, time of global instability, isn't getting any easier, but it sounds like Nestlé are making great progress. By the way, worth saying here, as I was doing my research, hoping that I'd be able to find something like, oh yeah, but Rob, what about this? You've got a pretty good slate at the moment in a time of activism on many boards and many shareholders causing all sorts of problem around stakeholder goals. Not so for Nestlé, as far as I can see.
I mean, it's very kind of you to say that, David, but honestly, the range of challenges that we face, we are constantly in the spotlight. And I think one of the things I feel coming in as an outsider, I came in still with the outsider's view, and I try to keep that as much as possible. Somehow or other to kind of think myself into a position of, well, if I was in my previous role, how would I look at this issue? But we do get a lot of criticism along the way, and some of it may be justified. I don't think no company is perfect, especially one the size of Nestlé. But I think an awful lot of what we're doing now under the leadership of Mark Schneider, he's really clear about the sustainability agenda and why it matters to him and why it matters for a company that's 160 years old and wants to be around in another 160 years. And frankly, the scale of the challenges that we're facing as a global society, we do need to be on our mettle here. I mean, there is a responsibility on a company like this.
And I know he's very active in the World Economic Forum himself and in various CEO fora. Do you think this, I'm interested in what you said about collaboration before. Do you think there's enough urgency around this agenda? Sounds like urgency is the missing thing in many companies.
Well, at the risk of being slightly controversial, to say the least, I can think of a few leaders' forums that are horribly mistitled. There might be forums, but I don't know that they're always leaders' forums. I think, and that's not necessarily a point of the finger at WEF, but I mean, there's a whole raft of different platforms. And sometimes I kind of sit there and think, well, it's just a little bit too smug, a little bit too self-congratulatory, and a little lacking in challenge as to, what it takes to be a real leader. I mean, things like, for instance, positioning a company as being net zero when your goals are all scope 1 and 2 and most of your impacts are in scope 3, I'm sorry, but I just don't like that. I think it's really misleading. There's still quite a lot of that out there, actually, and it deserves to be called out. I think some of the forums just don't seem to me to have that kind of energy and determination. I'm not going to name names. I think it would be inappropriate to do that. But is there urgency? Yes. Is it consistent across the piece? No, it's not. If it was, Guterres wouldn't have to keep issuing those calls to action that he does. We'd be all over it. And sadly, we're not fully all over it.
Just to talk a little bit about shareholders and particularly some of the stakeholder pushback you can see in the US and obviously in the fossil fuel sector in particular. What's your kind of defence against that? Again, as I say, it didn't seem to me that you have shareholders that are rattling this particular cage. They seem to be on the journey with you. But if you take the grief that Unilever have had, for instance, such a great shame given the agenda that they've driven. And actually, there's some sharp and smart lines about who cares about the purpose of mayonnaise, which mask a bigger attempt by all at Unilever to do the right thing. Is that a polemic you have inside Nestlé?
Well, look, Alan Jope and colleagues at Unilever are perfectly capable of defending themselves, but I do think that some of the criticism that they were facing was a little bit misplaced. And yeah, we can all have a bit of a joke about the purpose of mayonnaise. It's salads and sandwiches. So, yeah. But actually, if you look at Unilever's evidence, and I'll speak for the industry now, then rather than just Nestlé. But if you look at the evidence that Unilever would present, and I've heard Alan actually put it out there in this way, all of their brands with purpose do well. They're the ones that do well, right? And I'll say that because I can say the same thing for our shop. Brands where we've got this thing called building brands the Nestlé way. And when you put purpose into the brand, you do better. I want to say a couple of things about shareholders, though, because I think there's been quite an interesting pivot here. I spent like 25 years working in sustainability, and I would say that for 20 years of that time, we spent a lot of energy sort of criticising shareholders because they don't get it, do they? And the shareholders will never understand, and they're only interested in short-term profits and so on and so forth. Well, we might have been right 20 years ago, but we're wrong now. I would say that most of the investors that I speak to know an awful lot more about the issues than many of the NGOs I speak to. And the NGOs don't know enough about the investor space, I would say. That's kind of how I would put it. When I came in, I'll go back a few years. I was told that investor relations at Nestlé about 10 years ago, I guess this would be, weren't terribly much interested in this agenda and you couldn't get a hearing. Well, I found it to be completely different. My investor relations team here, is a huge appetite for this agenda. because they can see the importance to the future of the business, and the people they speak to, i.e. the investors, the analysts, they're all asking these questions. And, you know, I mentioned earlier on, my last call before this was with marketing. My first one tomorrow morning is with a bunch of investors. You know, so the appetite is really there. And on the ESG front, and this criticism that's emerged in particularly in the States, but not exclusively so, we see signs of it popping up over here. I think it's worrying because it politicizes something that I don't think ought to be politicized. But given we're in a kind of post-Trump world in the States, for better or worse, whatever your politics, we are where we are. The way in which politicians have sought to control a narrative or to find a narrative and use terms like woke or terms like ESG and finding a counter proposition, I don't think it's helpful to progress. But I do think that there is a way to address it. And it's that, I mean, I've never been a big fan of the term ESG anyway. But what we've found, and we do this in the States, and we'll go on doing it wherever we need to. But rather than talking about ESG, let's talk about climate change and its negative impacts on communities. Let's talk about equality and diversity rather than ESG. Let's break it down into the topics that people can relate to, rather than some kind of overarching label that somehow or other has been pigeonholed by certain politicians in a way that I don't think helps. So yeah, I think that there is a way around it, but it's unwelcome.
Yeah, and I do think the interesting bit of ESG for me, ironic that I would say this, is governance, actually. And as you said earlier, companies that are built responsibly, that track properly, that are transparent in what they do and are well governed, well led, well managed, are more likely to be successful. So, that has been missing in action somewhat. I mean, I was vaguely horrified to be reading of Silicon Valley Bank and thinking, how on earth did that happen? Given that you thought that there was governance in place that meant that kind of thing was never going to happen again. And worse so, I mean, the Swiss press, I'm sure, has been on fire of late.
Not just the Swiss press, but Credit Suisse, I guess you're talking about. It's a problem that's been rumbling in the background for a long time. So it's not like it suddenly happened, but it's quite interesting. I think this goes, funnily enough, I couldn't help thinking of Anthony the other day. This is a bit of an off-topic thing, but Anthony was obviously Anthony Jenkins at Barclays, thinking about, okay, so what is our focus? Is it investment banking? Is it retail banking? Is it both? And he was pushing down the retail banking direction. And I think Credit Suisse has been through a similar journey, and I think the challenges with investment banking are plain for all to see.
But it's tough times altogether. But anyway, Rob, conscious of your time, can we just end by, if you're one of our viewers from the great community is the World Federation of Advertisers, what should marketeers and brand thinkers have at the top of their agenda? What would your advice be?
Well, I'm not going to boil it down to one thing, but let me give you a couple of thoughts on that. Firstly, I want to go back to the theme of regeneration. So we talk about regenerative food systems, and one of the reasons why we think regeneration matters is because we have to move beyond sustainability. It's not just about sustaining the present state anymore. We have to renew and we have to restore. And one way in which you could define it is if you look at the Brundtland definition of sustainability, which was development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay, well, I'm sorry, but we're past that. It's no longer about, we've already compromised the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, that's not good enough. I think it's now about development that meets the needs of the present whilst enhancing or improving the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that, to my mind, is a challenge to brand owners and marketeers. And one way in which we think about regeneration is it should be the case that the more you buy this product, the better the world becomes. Not the better the consumer experience, not the better. Of course, that matters. Of course, that becomes a sine qua non. I mean, that's the first. You've got to have that, right? But that having been said, how does buying more of this product make the world a better place? Now, can you imagine that as a proposition in the marketplace? Not just that you love this drink or you love that particular ready meal, but that buying more of it is genuinely making the world a better place. I mean, that's quite an aspiration. So that would be my long-term. That's the kind of aspiration that I think brands and marketeers should be looking for. However, if I want to bring it down to, that's all very well and all very lofty. What do we do first up? Get informed. Really get informed. I still find far too many agency folk who somehow or other think that carbon neutrality is a good thing without any substance behind it, or climate friendly is a good thing to put on a product. It's not. It really isn't. It needs substance. So get informed.
I think you've been a massive help to our entire audience on informing them, Rob. So thanks for that. A fantastic conversation. Great to see you again. I'm not sure whether you'll be joining us for the WFA Global Marketer Forum in Istanbul. I hope so.
I will do my best to be there. But by some means or other.
Yeah, because as you know, I think for us at the WFA, joining up this agenda is something really dear to our hearts, and better marketing should be helping make the planet a better place.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, there's an opportunity to be in service, I just think it's Solly Townsend said this years ago, brands will save the world.
Well, what a fantastic conversation. And I should just point out, for those of you that think this is some kind of peculiar fashion statement, I had a skiing accident and I've got a replacement shoulder, but I'm absolutely fine, especially after a conversation like that, a conversation that really matters to all of us, and great to see the work that Nestlé are doing. But what I'm really looking forward to is seeing all of you in Istanbul at the end of the month, and hopefully this will be gone by then. But see you again very soon. Take care. Bye.